So I would like to just make a couple of points in this presentation, as well as talking about my personal experience. I'd like to point this quote was something my wife shared with me a few years ago, just about how traumatic it is for a family to have a veteran go through traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress disorder. The fact that when I returned home, I was very different than the person that had deployed to Iraq in 2006. But I'd like to make a couple points. That one is there's a myth out there that if a veteran will just go in for the right treatment at the VA, that he can be healed from TBI or post-traumatic stress. And I'd like to emphasize that that is just not the case. And in 2013 and then again in 2015, the VA published a study that showed that the leading therapies that they were using, prolonged exposure therapy and cognitive processing therapy, as well as SSRIs, basically 1/3 of the patients who were going through those ended up worse than they had started out with. 2/3 of the patients who went through retained their PTSD diagnoses, and out of everyone who went through, after 6 months, there was no evidence of significant improvement compared to just being on the wait list or treatment as normal. So basically, the idea that if you just get into the VA for their therapies that you can be healed is not supported by any factual evidence. And in 2014, the National Institute of Health published a report that the VA, in fact, had no evidence at all that any of the money or treatments that they had reported had healed any veterans. And so the idea, the conclusion from these studies that were published by VA doctors was that we need new treatments, that what we're doing is just not working. And unfortunately, it's taken us 15 years since Operation Enduring Freedom began in 2001 to recognize that. An example of that is the VA's top-tier PTSD programs. Their average decrease in the PCL score after average of 6 weeks of treatment is only 5 points on the PCL score. 50 is their baseline cutoff, even though 40, they debate about it, but 50 is the kind of the cutoff they're using. Another point is that we are underappreciating the prevalence of traumatic brain injury. If you look at the Defense Veterans Brain Injury Clinic website, and this is the organization that is cited in the media on how many TBIs they are, they list out the number of TBIs, and you can see I included the numbers between 2002 and 2014. There's a little asterisk at the end of those numbers. You go down to the footnote, and it says that over 80% of those are peacetime TBIs. That means that they're only reporting in that number about 55,000 combat TBIs. The problem is when you look at all the prevalent studies that have been done, most notably by the RAND Corporation, they've estimated that the true TBI, combat TBI rate, this is people who have TBIs from IEDs, mortar explosions, rockets, this isn't just vehicle accidents, this is actual combat-related TBIs, is closer to 500,000. What does that means is that the government, the Defense Veterans Brain Injury Clinic is underreporting the number of TBIs by a very substantial number. Now, you got to remember that when DOD and VA talk about TBIs, it's all about the first 24 hours. It's all a TBI is just whether you were unconscious or not and how long you were unconscious, and that defines it. It has nothing to do with how long you were, whether you had permanent brain damage or not. So you look at the numbers, have been constantly changing on what they call the miserable minority, the number of people who have traumatic brain injuries that have long-term measurable effects. And a few years ago, they said it was a very small number. Then they went to 5%, and then they went to 10%. Now they're at 15 to 20%. Every time a study comes out, that number grows. So if we assume it's 15 to 20%, that means our target of people that we need to help is 80 to 100,000 combat veterans who have long-term impairment due to brain damage caused by traumatic brain injuries. So that is our target population. To my personal experience, this is my Stryker armored vehicle, an 8-wheel, 23-ton armored vehicle. This is that vehicle on May 13th, Mother's Day 2007, after being struck by a suicide car bomb. If you look, the little fragments in front are the largest remaining pieces of that sedan, which was packed with several hundred pounds of explosives. Now, this video is a segment of my first suicide car bomb experience.
Watch, this bitch is gonna... Holy fucking shit! God dang!
I apologize for the profanity. That was true soldier language going on there. Fortunately, that suicide bomber at the last minute didn't realize he'd been recruited as a suicide bomber. They drugged him, put him in the car. He woke up that morning, and they sent him off to meet Muhammad. And he decided at the last minute that he didn't really aspire to be a suicide bomber, so he jumped out of the car. And so we were able to command detonate that explosion. So nobody was killed in that explosion. However, if you can imagine, the same people make all of the car bombs. So if you can imagine, when that went off, I was in the center of that explosion. And when I got done, this was my post-blast evaluation. Everything's normal, released to duty, take 2 of these, call me in the morning. And so I'd had a mild, all I've ever had is mild traumatic brain injuries. They've all been mild. So this is one of several MRI images that shows a measurable lesion in the brain. This is a diffuse tensor image which measures axons, the neural pathways, and this is eyeballs down, so there is a clear asymmetry between the left side of the brain and the right side, which is very clear brain damage caused by mild traumatic brain injuries. And these are all matched up by neurocognitive testing that showed in several areas I was operating at a 70 IQ point range. I was operating more than 80 points below my baseline in memory and executive functioning. So all from mild traumatic brain injuries. This was a SPECT imaging, what we call the Swiss cheese brain. This is a SPECT image where the abnormally functioning areas have been redacted. Those aren't real holes. That's just areas where the metabolism is significantly below normal. So I think the cutoff is somewhere around 2 or 3 standard deviations below normal. So it's not, this isn't mildly abnormal, this is markedly abnormal areas. This is another view, another SPECT scan way of presenting it. This is compared to a quantitative database. This is like doing a quantitative EEG, except with the a SPECT scan. It's statistically compared to a normative database, and gray is normal. The darker you get down to black, and you're more than 5 standard deviations below normal. So this is a markedly abnormal. This is my brain in 2012. This is 5 years after injury, and this is after I have completed the best treatments in the Department of Defense and the Department of Veterans Affairs. I have done all the standard model of care, best practice treatments and therapies, and alternative, So this is 3 years later. Well, this is 2012. This is in August 2015. This was 7 months ago on the right-hand side. This is the improvement that I went through: hyperbaric oxygen, low-level light therapy, and I did a neuromodulation type. It wasn't RTMS. It was direct electrical, similar follow on to lens, but I did that as well. And so those are the outcomes. We look at, again, the 2012, on the bottom is the 2015. So there is still evidence of this. This looks like a mild TBI now, a little bit on there. I still have impairment. I'm not healed 100%, but my symptom profile has improved so much that I have gone from being in daily pain with pain in my head so badly that I literally wanted to blow my brains out to end it, to where I was completely dysfunctional as a person. I could not do anything for more than a couple hours a day. I couldn't sleep. I could not function. I was totally occupationally impaired. My marriage and children were suffering. I could not feel positive emotions. The only emotions I could feel were anger, and that's about it. Could not, after I went through HBOT, and felt happiness for the first time in 6 years. It was unbelievable to have that. Realize that I'm feeling an emotion I haven't felt for years, and it was euphoric. But that's what we can achieve And we see it, I also have images from the limbic, from the subcortex, and we see the same improvement in the subcortex, in the amygdala, in the cerebellum, in the hippocampus, in the basal ganglia. We see improvements in all of those. We see matched improvements in all of my symptom categories. I sleep, I'm not in pain, I can feel positive emotions, I have improved cognitive abilities, and that's what we can achieve by combining these treatments together. And finally, this is what we're here about. This is Team Richards. You know, it's not just about the veteran, it's about bringing a family and healing a family, not just the veterans. And pending your questions, that concludes my briefing.